All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to the show. This is the Fight Insight podcast. I'm your host, Timmy B, and you can see that Ringside Rain is not here with us this week. She will be here next week as we meet a young fighter. She's a Muay Thai fighter, won the gold medal in the World Games, and she's making her Bellator MMA debut on September 7th at the Bellator Champions Series on September 7th. She is Ashley Whiplash Thiner. So make sure you're here next week for that. But this week, it's a very, very special episode. And as you can see, I'm already joined by my guest. He is an experienced trial attorney, a former prosecutor, and a former candidate for Santa Clara County District Attorney in 2022. For nearly a decade, this man worked in criminal prosecution, focusing on the prosecution of violent crimes in both Silicon Valley and New York City. He currently is a senior associate at a large firm and handles various kinds of civil litigation. Daniel has an AB from Harvard and a JD from Columbia and is a native of the San Francisco Bay Area. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Daniel Chung.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Yeah, thank you so much. Today is a good episode. We're going to talk, and I'm so glad that you're here because we are going to talk all about what happened or what is still happening with Cain Velasquez, obviously a UFC heavyweight fighter who has found himself in some trouble. And just last week, he has pled a no contest. I don't know what that means, Daniel. Not really quite sure. But let's say, should we get started with the show?
Yeah, Tim, let's hit it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Fight Insight Podcast.
Daniel, you killed that intro. Ringside Rain will be jealous. Daniel, I really appreciate it, man. Before we start, I know you wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Delighted to talk with you today, just share my personal opinions. Obviously, I'm a lawyer by trade. I have to be very careful about providing legal advice. So today I'm just giving some general commentary. None of this should be, considered specific legal advice for anybody. This is just commenting in my personal capacity on some current events.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And I mean, it couldn't be any more local to you because, as I said in the intro, you're running for DA in Santa Clara County, where this trial is being heard. That's correct?
Yeah, so I ran in 2022. I know a lot of the prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges who work here. This is my home county where I grew up for decades and then came back to serve as a prosecutor after working in New York City as well. So it's near and dear to me, and I know a lot of the players here.
Yeah, it is quite crazy. And thank you so much for joining. We've had legal individuals in the past that have come on to speak about things, specifically to the Cain Velasquez case when it first happened, when the charges were dropped, and we had a lawyer. He has now since passed away, and I love this man. His name was Daniel Martinez out in Miami, and he explained a whole bunch to us about what it was. But now, 2 years later, incredibly, here we are. The trial is still going on, or not the trial, but the sentencing is still to be had. And I wanted to start it off, Daniel. Last week, it was reported that Cain Velasquez entered a plea of no contest to felony attempted murder, assault, and multiple weapons charges in a California court in exchange for a lighter sentence. So what does that mean?
It basically means that there was a plea deal with the prosecutor's office. So in California, you can plead guilty or not guilty, which I think most people understand. But there is this third option called no contest. And no contest is very interesting because it's a way of kind of passively giving up and saying that the prosecution has enough evidence to convict you. So it's not an active admission of guilt. It's not an affirmative admission of guilt. But it is a way of pleading guilty that's recognized just the same in a court of law. They'll recognize it just as you would if you were to plead guilty. And it has the same consequences for you in that criminal court. So you can be sentenced to jail, probation, prison, all the sort of normal conditions that might be associated with a guilty plea through a no contest plea. The only thing with the no contest plea is it's basically saying, look, I believe the prosecution can prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I'm not going to necessarily affirmatively say I'm guilty, but I'm throwing up my hands and saying I'm giving up. And so I'm ready to face the consequences of being convicted now under the law. And so a court of law will look at that defendant just as if they had pled affirmatively guilty to a crime.
It's so interesting. Why do we not see, and I have a list of questions, but obviously I'm going to go off on a million tangents. Why do we not see more no contest than we do guilty?
Why do we not see more of those types of pleas?
Right.
Well, funny thing you ask, in Santa Clara County, the vast majority of pleas are actually no contest pleas. This actually surprised me as a prosecutor coming from New York City, where I was used to more people stating the facts of their guilt on the record and actually affirmatively admitting guilt, saying, I am guilty and therefore sentence me as a guilty person. Here, when I came to Santa Clara County, I saw that there was this strange practice of letting most defendants plead no contest. As a prosecutor, I was a little bit shocked by this because, we fight very hard for victims of crime, and we want victims to be heard, respected, acknowledged in court. And at least I believed that one of the sort of ways in which we start the healing and restoration process for a victim is for them to hear from their offender, their defendant, that they did something wrong, that they affirmatively, admit it, they acknowledge the facts of their guilt, and then they ask to be, held accountable for that guilt. But instead, we have this weird sort of circumvention of that direct admission of guilt by just saying, look, I give up, no contest, I'm not going to fight it, I believe you can convict me, therefore just let's proceed with sentencing instead of that guilt aspect. And so I think we're missing a huge element of that sort of criminal justice process in Santa Clara County when we do that.
And so when you plead a no contest, it means you no longer go to a trial. You no longer will be standing in front of a jury of your peers, because essentially you've said, that's it. Just give me my sentencing. And that's why I've read that his sentencing will be occurring shortly.
Correct. Once you enter that plea of no contest, it's just as if you had pled guilty, and therefore all the trials are going to stop, all the hearings are going to stop. Basically it stops the case fully. And the only thing left really is for everybody to figure out what you should be sentenced to, and for that imposition of that sentence to move forward.
Watching a lot of Law and Order and and police dramas as I do, Daniel, one of the things you hear when you said, I think at the beginning, it's a plea deal. Normally, to me, that's where I will admit to this in exchange for this. Is that what a no contest gets you?
Yeah, without that really direct affirmative admission of guilt. So, in some ways, Cain is telling the prosecutors, look, I give up. Look, I will not make you go to trial. I will not make the victims and witnesses have to come to court. I'm willing to help the process in some regard, right? And he is, making it shorter, making it much more efficient, making it less traumatizing for the victims and witnesses. So he is offering something. And in exchange, it seems like the prosecutors were willing to drop the premeditation element, which would have had the most serious consequences for him in this case.
Okay, and I appreciate you saying that, because as I was watching back my old episode, and if you haven't seen it, episode 56,
yeah,
Daniel, I'm sure you've watched all 185 of our episodes, but episode 56 is where we had Daniel Martinez, and to put it so that you understand, he's a criminal defense lawyer.
Right.
So I thought it was perfect to have him, because he was going to be able to tell us, hey, what could I do for this guy? And he was throwing his hands up in the air, because he was like, this is premeditated and this is a real problem for this guy. So my next question is that one of the biggest issues was, as I understood it, the premeditated behavior shown by Cain. Following the vehicle, having a weapon, waiting for the victim outside the courthouse, engaging in a high-speed car chase for 11 miles. These are all allegedly, okay? shooting at the vehicle, striking the unintended target in the vehicle in the arm and torso. As a result of the plea that we're saying here, the premeditated murder charges, from what I've read and what you're saying, seems to be dropped. And that means he will no longer face a mandatory sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole. And you're saying that that's correct. So by doing this now, he has avoided a massive issue in what his sentencing was going to include.
Yeah, his sentence could have been a lot worse if he had gone to trial as charged in the complaint. It would have been, or the information actually, after the preliminary hearing. It would have been very risky for him to do that. And so from his perspective, it makes 100% sense for him to do this, to take away the most serious aspect of his punishment, the risk factor for that punishment, and try to get some level of leniency in this case. But I would propose kind of two things about this. One, it's a bit problematic that the DA's office, it seems like they made a lot of public statements about this case, and they alleged the premeditation, and they talked very specifically about it. And for them to now walk that back and say, oh, just kidding, we'll drop that now, is a little bit inconsistent, right? Because, you guys talked about how serious this was, how much planning there was, how much danger there was, not only to the victims, but also to the public at large. And now, 2 years after the fact, what specifically has changed with regards to the facts that you alleged that suddenly merit this removal of the premeditation? It causes a lot of questions to be raised. Was there evidence that was withheld? Are there problems with witnesses? Oftentimes when prosecutors back off of serious charges, there are things going on in the background that may be affecting the case, that may be affecting the prosecutor's willingness to push hard on the case as well. And the other element that I'd propose to you regarding this case is that normally when prosecutors have this much leverage against someone, saying, I could throw you into, life without parole in prison, that's as serious as it can get. When you have that much leverage and you decide to throw away that leverage and say, okay, I will bargain with you, I am going to meet you halfway or midway or whatever, most prosecutors are very specific about what you're going to get. They'll say something like, okay, fine, you plead guilty to the second top charge and you're going to get 15 years, right? Like they come to a very specific number saying 15 years. From all the accounts I have heard, it does not seem like there is a specific number of years in prison that have been designated for Cain. Instead, it seems like the DA's office is punting to the judiciary, saying, hey, judge, why don't you look at the facts? Why don't you look at the aggravating and mitigating circumstances here? And you can take the public blowback or praise or blame or whatever, depending on how you decide to sentence him. So in some ways, I'm a little bit astonished by this plea deal because, you're walking back something that you claimed was super serious and you took away your most significant piece of leverage. And now you didn't even define it specifically what the terms are going to be.
Well, is it, and you're getting to every single thing I want, Daniel. I'm so happy that you're here. I don't know. Is it possible, though, that they have worked out the time or the charge and they've told the judge on the side and they'll just release that later rather than publicly state it now? Like, I guess you don't have to go to the media and say, hey, I've struck a plea deal with this guy. We're giving him this in exchange for this. I guess you don't have to do that.
Yeah, in theory, it is totally possible that they have arranged a specific number. They have very specific terms to this deal. But from the way the plea deal was publicly announced by the office, the prosecutors, and everybody else reporting on it, it seems like what is going to happen is the probation department is going to do a thorough investigation and prepare a sentencing report for the judge. And the judge, after reviewing that report, is going to come to some definitive number that he believes is appropriate based on the totality of the circumstances. So that's what I mean by it seems like there is a bit of punting going on to the judiciary. Oftentimes, prosecutors are happy to brag about, oh, I sentenced him to 15 years, 20 years, 10 years. They often are very willing to share details like that. But the relative silence or lack of kind of acknowledgement to those terms, to me, signals there might be some punting.
But that would also mean that perhaps, like you were alluding to, maybe there was something wrong in the investigation. And to that end, again, from all my TVs and movies, Daniel, that's where like they didn't use the proper methods to obtain evidence. They didn't do something that perhaps the defense is going to raise, and then which would like possibly throw out the whole court charge or something like that. Like there's some sort of what do you call it, like a little nitpicky thing that they're going to catch on, ruin the whole case, and now then the prosecutor's doomed, because you're like, hey, you had this guy dead to rights, and you used the wrong pen to fill out the wrong checkbox for that evidence, and now we're doomed, right?
Yeah. I wish it were usually something as nitpicky as that, but unfortunately, I've had personal experience in that office in Santa Clara County where things are just overcharged. And from the get-go, the investigations are not done properly. They're not done thoroughly. They just overcharge it at the beginning, hoping that, hey, look, we'll figure it out later. Someone will investigate this later. Someone will take a closer look at this later and figure out what the pluses and minuses of this case are. And in my, opinion, that's really reckless way of prosecuting cases, because these charges are extraordinarily serious, right? Murder, rape, attempted murder, attempted rape. These are like as serious as they can get. And people's lives are turned upside down. And so for prosecutors to be like, let's figure it out later, or let's hope the facts come to light later, is really irresponsible, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. To your point as well, when you were talking about how strong the DA felt later, I did save this posting here. This was said by Jeff Rawson, who is the district attorney, who is the prosecutor for this case. He states, for those only listening on audio, this defendant decided to become judge, jury, and executioner. His actions endangered innocent bystanders, including young children and their parents who could have been injured or killed, as he shot at his intended victim. We have excellent law enforcement in this county. Let them do their job. And to that point, he was talking about the kind of vigilantism essentially displayed by Cain in doing this kind of thing. So my next question to you, Daniel, is what does this, in terms of the plea bargain, in terms of how this case seems to be going, what does this mean for vigilante justice moving forward, specifically in Santa Clara, but around the United States?
Well, I do think there is a certain level of accountability happening here. So I have to give credit where credit is due. Cain was prosecuted. He was convicted now, and he will be sentenced. And most likely, even if it's not life in prison, he's still going to get some years in prison. That would be my best estimate. I don't believe he's eligible for probation because of the firearm charges being used in the attempted murder. So he is looking at some level of prison. I think there are a lot of interesting mitigating factors in this case that the judge is really going to have to contemplate as he thinks about the right number. So in some respects, vigilante justice, we've held it accountable, saying it's not okay. You can't do whatever you want. Even if you're going to serve some prison time, we are holding you accountable. On the other hand, it's also saying to people, look, if the politics of this get out of hand, if there is enough public pressure, if there is enough sort of media attention on a particular case and the heat gets a little bit too hot, maybe we'll just let the courts decide how to administer justice against vigilantes. And to some respect, I think that's an abdication of your responsibility. That's an abdication of your role as a prosecutor. You know the facts better than anyone because you've seen all the evidence. You've talked to all the victims. You know all the witnesses. So you should be able to come to a very specific number saying this is what we should hold you accountable for.
Right. Because it has to set the bar at some point, right?
Right.
Now you're saying about, whether the public pressure and things like that play. So there's two things I want to touch on. But the first one is this at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to put it up. Hashtag free Cain, Daniel. That was trending on Twitter and everywhere. You saw, you saw fighters wearing shirts saying hashtag free Cain. You saw that in all the postings. It became a very public spectacle, this whole thing. And of course, because of the seriousness of the charges against the other gentleman, which caused Cain to allegedly do this action, and just the whole thing about it is just so terrible and disgusting, right? But there was this massive public outcry. He hires a what is he, like a celebrity lawyer who, by the way, I saw that lawyer on Piers Morgan when they were talking about the baby reindeer case, and I'm like, that's the guy that's covering Cain. So, but here's my question: how much public pressure would the district attorney Jeff Rawson have faced due to the hashtag free Cain movement?
I think he did face a lot of pressure. And, the public is entitled to express their opinion. We live in an age where we get instant feedback. Social media runs amok. There are hashtags for everything. You can get canceled in 24 hours. So, we live in an interesting world, right? And people feel very entitled to express their opinions, and that's totally fine. I think when there is that much public opinion about something and volatility in the public about something, I think that's when it becomes extra important for especially prosecutors to be careful about what you say, because every word you put out there into the media, whether it's increasing the significance of this case or decreasing the significance of this case, it has a ripple effect. And so as prosecutors, we don't try cases in the court of public opinion, right? We go to a court of law. That is when we talk. That is when we question people. That's when we submit evidence. And so good prosecutors generally hold their tongue, because at the end of the day, people are going to believe what they believe. And you're not going to be able to show the general public all the evidence and all the facts and witnesses that you have. You know much more than the public, right? And so with that level of knowledge comes the responsibility to be very careful about what you say about that case and to reserve that for our court of law so that both the people as well as the defendant can have a fair trial. There's lots of rules, even for general lawyers, about saying things in the media about your cases, because it could have all sorts of ripple effects. And we generally want to help preserve the integrity of court proceedings and make sure that no one is unfairly prejudiced by extrajudicial statements that are being made.
But it's great. But it's crazy though, Daniel, because in the world we live in, like with this hashtag free Cain, unlike a decade ago, the news cycle, everything that happens now in today's world can go so fast and so quick. And with Cain Velasquez, forget the details of the case, which are so difficult to listen to, but the public nature of him being a former UFC champion, having all these high-level athletes that the public pretty much idolize, right? I mean, these athletes look like Greek gods, like they're just statues of muscle on top of muscle, Dan. It's just like you and I,
Exactly.
Yeah. But, the public idolizes these people. And so when the athletes get behind the case and the athletes are leading the charge with the hashtag, I mean, essentially what you're saying is it may have played a factor. And so if you're on that side where you think that Cain Velasquez should have been free and you were tweeting out that hashtag free Cain and you were doing that, hey, you may have actually helped this case.
Yeah, I mean, I will never know for sure what was in the minds of the prosecutors who pled this case out. But I imagine one huge factor was the specter or the fear of jury nullification, that a jury, even though they know what the law is, the judge is telling them, You're not allowed to shoot at random people. You're not allowed to, try to murder people just because, something terrible happened to your family. That people would be inflamed by the facts and they would empathize. They would see themselves in Cain's shoes and be able to say, and they only need one person, right? For a defense attorney, it's fantastic because you just need one juror to believe you, to side with you, and to feel your emotions, how unfair this is, how the person who allegedly committed, the greater wrong or the underlying wrong that led to all of this is still, nothing has happened yet, but here is this person who is facing all of these consequences. Just that one person, if that one person holds out, that's the ticket to a not guilty for Cain.
Well, and that's the thing too, though, right? By publicizing this case right from the get-go, having the t-shirts, having the hashtag, you were getting in the minds of everybody. Like, where were you possibly going to find these jurors that had never heard of this case, right? Like, they would have already been essentially, swayed by the public in their regular daily life, hearing about the case, seeing the hashtag, whatever it may be. And I guess if you're the defense attorney, you'd be making sure that you put those guys on the jury, right? I've watched jury movies before too, Daniel. I know how it goes, So yeah, that's difficult. Can I ask, you're a former prosecutor yourself, you were running for the position of the DA. Understanding what you do or knowing what we know, not knowing what we don't know, is there anything that you might have done differently if you were the prosecutor in the case?
Based on what I know at this time, I think the best thing that I would have done right now is, if I'm going to do a plea deal, plead him out to a specific number, right? Because I think it's the DA's responsibility to be like, this amount of time reflects his culpability. It's proportional to what he did. It takes into account his mitigating circumstances and his aggravating circumstances. And this is what we believe he deserves. We don't believe he deserves to rot in prison for the rest of his life. However, we believe this amount of punishment is appropriate. I think that abdication, or that seeming abdication from everything that I'm hearing and reading, is very disappointing to me, because here's what's going to happen. What if the judge doesn't hold him accountable in the way that the public desires, right? Then there's going to be an outcry. There has been a judge in this county who, from the public's eyes, inappropriately sentenced a swimmer at Stanford for sexual related crimes. And that judge was recalled. When the public saw what they perceived to be a very lenient and inappropriate sentence for these very serious sexual charges, the public outcry was significant. And the next time they had an opportunity, they kicked that judge out of his office.
Right.
So,
well, but that's the thing, though, because these positions are elected positions, that's also always got to play into your mind, right? Because like, these people do serve the people, and that's a good thing, but it also means that there is that pressure as well. So,
yeah, it's very different from the federal system, for sure.
Right. When we spoke on the case 2 years ago with, again, Mr. Daniel Martinez on episode 56, even he, a defense lawyer who his job is to get criminals, the most reasonable and respective sentence possible in his mind, he predicted that definitive jail time, likely life. At that time, he was like, it's a done deal, dude. Like, he said, Timmy, if you're part of this MMA community, like, don't get your hopes up. Like, this is not good. Knowing what you know with all the charges, understanding now that there is this plea of no contest, if you had to guess, what would you say would be his sentence?
I think it will be in single digits. I think it will be high single digits.
High single digits.
Yeah.
For the less mathematically inclined, Daniel, that means 9 or less, people.
Yes.
9 or less.
And remember that California is one of the best states to be a criminal defendant, because not only are our laws incredibly lenient, but there are so many ways you can get credits. half time for this, 80% for this, all sorts of good behavior credits and prison credits and whatnot. So in actuality, let's say Cain was sentenced to 10 years. 10 years really still is not 10 years. 10 years is probably going to be less than 10 years. And
Right.
so, you know, for the people who are not as informed about the system, that number is just a starting point rather than the ending point.
Right. And so parole would, and does any of this mean that parole is not an option? No, that's totally separate of all this. Like he could,
Yeah, I mean,
he could get that.
what happens after your prison term, this doesn't really change any of those dynamics right now. It just made it possible for him to receive something like a single-digit prison sentence.
But you hear things like life without parole or blah blah, like you hear that term without parole, but you're saying that doesn't play in here. He might get parole, he might not, whatever. There's no hard and fast rule in, as from what you see.
Well, we know that he's not going to get life without the possibility of parole.
Yes. No. Forget
that
that
has
now.
been removed altogether. So now he can get a very definitive sentence, like 5 years, 7 years, 9 years, and then
but they could say 10 years without parole or 5 years without parole. Like the judge could tack that on, but maybe not.
It will most likely be with some level of supervision afterwards. So parole usually follows, or some level of community supervision follows your incarceration. And so my bet would be that there's definitely going to be some after supervision as well, after he's released into the general public again.
And if you are a fight fan and you want to see Cain at events and things like that, understanding that he's been in jail for 2 years, I think. Is it including time served or no?
Say that again?
Sorry. Would his sentence include time served? So
yes,
he's been in there for 2 years.
Yeah, all the credits as well as the time that he's been accumulating up to this point would be credited towards his final sentence. So that's what I mean. Like, even if he got, a 10-year sentence, it would already subtract whatever time he spent plus any credits, if applicable, and then any other future credits as well.
That's very interesting, Daniel. So I mean, like you said, single digits, which is 9, minus the 2 he's been in there, he's out in 7 now, possibly sooner. And that's sooner. So, Daniel, what should people take away from this in the sense of the actions that were done? Because the community, the MMA community, was largely on Cain's side, but there was a split. There were people that said, hey, wait a second, this guy went around shooting a gun in the middle of public. You don't know who you're going to hit. In actuality, the thing says that he did hit a different person, an unintended target, an innocent person. What should the public take away from this?
My general encouragement to a lot of people is be humble about what you don't know. The news and social media and whatnot love sound bites, love quick and dirty things just to kind of get people's attention, make things go viral, sensationalize things, inflame people's emotions, and get people emotionally attached to things. But very often, when trials actually happen of even the most sensational crimes and whatnot, we learn all sorts of new facts, all sorts of new witnesses and evidence that we would have never heard about before. And, that should give everybody a little bit of pause, a little bit of humility, right? Like, if this were your family member, your loved one or whatnot, I think you would want people to withhold judgment a little bit. And let's see what happens in the court of law. Don't indict someone just in the court of public opinion, right? Let's let the legal process play out and let justice be done.
Nice. Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate this, man, because, first of all, I can see why you were a prosecutor. I can see why you were running for public office. I can see why you're a lawyer. You're very well spoken. You're very eloquent in how you're speaking to this. And I appreciate the knowledge that you're bringing to our show. So thank you so much for coming on. It's difficult because you see people with the passion on both sides, right? And you can see how they understand it. And then now when the news is coming out, people are so confused as to what this all means. Like, what the heck is a no contest? The general person just understands guilty or not guilty. So no one understood what this is. And then they were saying that the hearing or the sentencing trial or whatever it's called, the sentencing will occur in, I think, late September or October, something like that. So there's still some time for this all to play out. Can I ask, with a charge such as this, if you're an individual who has pled no contest, you're going to receive some jail time or whatever it is, when he is out, will there be restrictions to what he can do? Is he allowed to leave the country? Is he allowed to fight again? Are those things, is he just a regular citizen after that, or are there going to be restrictions?
Well, with a serious violent felony conviction like this, there are definitely going to be consequences in your life. Obviously, a convicted felon generally can't have a gun anymore, right? There might be restrictions as to where you might be able to live, how you might be able to vote in certain places. So depending on where Cain ends up, there could be all sorts of restrictions. Other countries may have restrictions on your ability to enter that country if you're a convicted felon. I know that certain countries care about drug offenses or even DUI convictions. Those things can affect your ability to travel freely as well. I suspect Cain is going to be okay after all of this. I think he probably has the means, the community, and the support necessary to thrive even after something as challenging as this. Hopefully he will learn from this whole process, and hopefully, the victims that he cared so much about as well, also, I hope they receive justice in a due, thoughtful, deliberate way, not in a vigilante way. I hope he comes to appreciate that this process, it benefits him as well. We want this process to work properly and hold everyone accountable the same, everyone being equal under the law, whether you're Cain Velasquez or just Cain whoever, Cain Joe.
Yeah. Good old Cain Smith, Daniel.
Cain Smith.
So thank you so much. I did want to give you a chance to say, is there anything that you wanted to say to fans, viewers, or listeners of the podcast?
Just thank you for having me. I am so delighted that you guys are talking about legal things and diving into current events. I think anything that gets people excited to talk about legal processes, to learn how juries work, how our criminal justice system works, is fantastic. Every time I get a new jury in to, voir dire them and question them, everyone's always like, I hate being here. I got vacation, I got work, I got blah, blah, blah. But once they start the trial and go through the trial with you, they love it. They're like, oh, I made some great friends. This is fantastic. I got to see some cool things. I love this process. When can I come back? And so I hope this is just one way to kind of excite people about the system that we live in and how we can make it better.
Definitely. People don't dress up like Princess Leia, like Tina Fey did on 30 Rock to try and get out of jury duty. That's not a thing. That doesn't happen.
People try all sorts of things.
Okay. All right. It is important for people to understand, though, about the vigilante thing. And I do have a former guest of the show. She's an MMA fighter and a former Marine who wanted to be here today, but unfortunately her schedule didn't allow her as well. But I know she wanted to talk about it as well. Defending yourself is so important, but there are lines that you cannot cross, and so it's very important. I mean, if you have questions like that, talk to someone. I don't know who you talk to, but I mean, don't do crazy things. Don't do anything that is going to put other people at danger. Don't do things that are kind of outside of your control. Like Daniel's saying, you let the law take its place or take its course, and I think that's the best thing. Daniel, I really hope, knock on wood, that no more UFC fighters or professional fighters get into crazy legal trouble. But if they do, you can expect an email from me, because I will be coming to ask you for you to be back on the show so you can help me understand it. But I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. I normally ask all my guests this last question. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask a more personal question to you. I ask it to everybody, Daniel. My mom used to ask me this question almost every day of my life growing up. So I'm going to take the time to ask it to you here as my last question. Daniel Chung, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you?
9. I'm pretty happy these days. I went through a very rough patch recently in the last few years during COVID, but I think it really made me appreciate life more. And so you have to kind of go through the valleys to really see how beautiful the peaks are. And so, I think if the criminal justice system is a reflection of that you can go through some of the darkest, worst things ever, but there can be redemption afterwards. And so my life in some ways is a reflection of that as well.
Nice. Well, I'm sorry for whatever it was in your life that happened that wasn't so great, but I'm glad that you are happy now, my friend. Thank you so much for being on the show. I cannot believe that we got you on. It was this couldn't have gone any better. Let me just put it that way. Like, sometimes I invite guests on and I don't know whether they're going to be too energetic or how they're going to be. Your camera was perfect. You're in focus. I can hear you so well. So, I mean, I really do hope the fans and listeners of this podcast enjoy this. I hope they take something away from it. At Daniel Chung, you are at Chung for Change on Instagram. So if you want to follow Daniel Chung, go check out at Chung for Change. That's CHUNG for Change. Daniel, this was a pleasure to meet you, my friend. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the time you spent, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And I hope not to talk to you soon, but I kind of hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.
All right. Appreciate take care. See ya. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that is the show. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. I don't want to go without saying thank you to our friends of the podcast, Rageworks Podcast Network. Go check them out at rageworksnetwork.com. You can find other great audio podcasts such as ours. And thank you to our alumni who went 3-0 this past weekend. Nicola, the Chaos Costello, she claimed that Australian boxing title in 42 seconds with the knockout. Impa Kasanganai advances to the PFL finals. He's going to go make another $1 million. Give me a money, I'm pretty sure. And then Dricus du Plessis, he defends his title at UFC 305. Congratulations to Dricus. Between what him and Izzy did after the fight, I think that was even more impressive than what was done in the cage, which I think was a fight of the year contender. But the way that they behaved themselves, the way that they were showing respect, the true martial artist code, that is what I like to see. So congratulations to both men in proving what great men they are in that fight, both in the cage and out. So congratulations to them. Guys, before I go, of course, last thing, Fight League Atlantic 16. Fight League Atlantic 16 is happening Saturday, September 21st. And in the morning, there's a BJJ tag team tournament that's happening. I've been talking about it here, Tapper Tag 3. Guys, go check it out. Fight League Atlantic 16. Go to fightleagueatlantic.com. You can get your tickets now. Seats are selling out like crazy, so you want to get there. Fight League Atlantic 16. They just announced our friend from prior episode, The Mummy, Abdelaziz. He's in the co-main event, taking on Daniel Abdunor of Matrix Boxing. Guys, you don't want to miss this. Get your plane tickets now. Go to Fight League Atlantic 16, Tapper Tag 3 on September 21st. I will see you there. I'm going to be there. It's going to be an incredible night. Guys, thank you for watching the podcast. It's been a great time. Great guest. Daniel Chung, he's welcome back anytime. I hope people don't get legally in trouble. But if they do, he will be back. Have a good one, guys. I'll see you next week.